Chapter 26 of Captain Bill McDonald, Texas Ranger. A Story of Frontier Reform. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by John Brandon. Captain Bill McDonald, Texas Ranger. A Story of Frontier Reform by Albert Bigelow Paine. Preventing a Prize Fight. The Fitzsimmons-Maher fight that didn't come off at El Paso, and why. Captain Bill takes up for a Chinaman. Culberson became governor in the course of time, and remembering Captain Bill's peculiar talents, was wont to rely upon him for special work in any portion of the state where nerve, determination, and prompt, accurate marksmanship were likely to be of value. During February 1896, a national sporting event, a ring contest between Bob Fitzsimmons and Pete Maher, was advertised to take place at El Paso, a busy city dropped down on the extreme western point of the Texas desert on the banks of the Rio Grande. Governor Culberson, speaking for himself as well as for the better class of citizens in his state, announced that so long as he was in office, Texas would not go on record as a prize-fighting commonwealth, and that the fight would not take place. Thereupon there came a crisis. Certain interested citizens of El Paso had made up a purse of $10,000 to bring this event to the Paris of Texas, and these and their friends were filled with indignation. Dan Stewart, prominent in Texas sporting matters and promoter of this particular event, issued a proclamation which bore not only the announcement that the fight would take place as advertised, but a picture of Dan himself. Also, it was declared that there was no law in Texas which would prevent prize fighting, and the preparations for this particular event continued. Whereupon Governor Culberson promptly called a special session of the legislature to pass a law which would be effective, and Adjutant General Mabry ordered the State Ranger Service to assemble at El Paso to see that this law was enforced, it having been widely reported that Bat Masterson, with 100 fighting men, would be present to see that the fight came off. Then, when it was rumored that the contest would take place in either Old or New Mexico, the boundaries of both being near El Paso, President Cleveland ordered the United States Marshal of New Mexico to proceed to the vicinity of El Paso and guard the isolated districts of that territory, while the governor of Chihuahua took measures to discourage the enterprise in that state. Things began to look pretty squally for the sporting fraternity, both in El Paso and at large, and they were mad clear through. The city council assembled and passed a denunciatory measure, condemning the governor for asking for rangers, the adjutant general for sending them, and the rangers for being present. It was of no use. The rangers went quietly about the streets, paying no attention to unfriendly looks and open threats as they passed along. Efforts were made by the principals and their friends to elude the rangers, but with no other result than that a ranger was appointed as a special bodyguard to each of the pugilists, while a third, Captain McDonald, became a temporary associate of Dan Stewart. They had nothing particular to do, these rangers, except to be companionable and pleasant, and to stay with their men. Wherever Stewart and Maher and Fitzsimmons went, their official attendants went with them, and even if not always welcome, they were entertained with sufficient courtesy, for the person of a ranger is sacred. Besides, he is reputed to be quick and fatal. Such sport became monotonous. The pugilists and their friends gave up the El Paso idea, and, still accompanied by the rangers, took the train from Langtree, a point where the Southern Pacific Railway touches the Rio Grande. The state of Coahuila lay across the river, and Langtree itself was at that period a proper gateway to a pugilist's paradise, its law being administered by one Roy Bean, Justice of the Peace and saloon keeper, whose sign read, "Mixed Drinks, Law West of the Pecos." It is said that Bean's drinks were about on a par with his law, and that the latter was administered with a gun. He tried court cases, granted divorces, and handed down decisions without the trammel of a jury or other assistance. Once when a citizen killed a Chinaman in his place, Bean consulted the statutes, and finding nothing in reference to the murder of a Chinaman in his saloon, discharged the prisoner as having committed no offense. At another time, when a man walking across a high bridge over the Pecos had fallen and broken his neck, and the matter was brought before Bean, the dispenser of law west of the Pecos discovered that the pockets of the unfortunate contained a six-shooter and $41 in money, whereupon he fined the dead man $25 and costs for carrying a concealed weapon, and appropriated the $41 and the six-shooter in settlement. A whole chapter could be written about Bean and his official service, but this is not the place for it. It is the place, however, for another incident concerning a Chinaman, a case in which, though tried west of the Pecos, the Chinaman's rights were sustained. The train bound for Langtry with the pugilistic party and rangers aboard stopped at Sanderson, a small wayside station in the desert, for lunch. Everybody was hungry and hurried over to a Chinese restaurant for something to eat, and the Chinese waiters scurried about to serve them. They were doing their best, but it was not easy to satisfy everybody at once. Next to Captain McDonald sat Bat Masterson. Bat has since given up all his reckless ways and become a good citizen, but at that time he was training with the unreformed and not feeling very well, anyhow. It seemed to Bat that a Chinese waiter was not getting around as promptly with food as he might, and he set in to admonish him. The Chinaman replied to the effect that he was doing his best, whereat Masterson decided to correct him with a table caster. Captain Bill had been sitting quietly, saying nothing, but as Masterson raised the caster, the ranger captain clutched his arm. "Don't you hit that man," he said. Masterson wheeled. "Maybe you'd like to take it up." Captain Bill regarded him steadily for an instant. "I done took it up," was his quiet answer. The caster was put down. Masterson reflected silently while he waited for his food. Perhaps that was the beginning of his reform. Arriving at Langtry, Stewart, Fitzsimmons, and Maher were escorted to the Rio Grande, where with all their fraternity they crossed over to Mexican soil, and the fight was pulled off in good order. It was a good fight, as fights go, and Fitzsimmons won with a knockout landed on Maher's jaw. But it did not take place on Texas soil. End of chapter 26.